And welcome once again to Neurodiversity with Theo Smith. And we are doing A to Z of parenting once again. I know you're probably getting so much value from this. And today we have an incredible guest. One reason why this guest is absolutely incredible is because there is a heritage link. There's a cultural link there of Wales. So we're going to hear some wonderful news and stories around what's going on in my home country. Although I'm not pleased, and I don't have the pleasure of living there anymore, just of going there on regular holidays. But as you know, Amanda and I are writing this book, 8 Set of Parenting, within the neurodiversity space, because we know how much parents are struggling. So every single episode is about that, providing you with value, providing you with information, insights, and an opportunity to connect with somebody you might not otherwise have connected with in the past, and therefore you can go and follow them and learn lots more from them. So who is that guest today? Well, Ceri Reid is joining us, and Ceri, such a pleasure to have you on. Would you just like to let the audience know a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, what you're about?
Oh, thank you, Theo. Absolutely delighted to be here today. So proud. So thank you. I'm Ceri Reid. I'm a neurodivergent mum, a wife, and a mother of 3 neurodivergent children. I was a diabetes specialist dietitian by trade, but due to unmet needs, I had to leave my career, and through frustration and confusion of the medical model for neurodivergence, I set up Parents' Voices in Wales in 2018 to advocate for neurodivergent families who commonly their children have mental health challenges, and to elevate the voice of parents and carers in meeting the early help and needs-led approach for learners in Wales. Thank you.
Absolutely amazing. And I've already had the pleasure of sharing a virtual stage with you. And I know the volume of knowledge, of insight, of expertise that you have on your journey. And I think what you share there is not a journey that is unusual to a lot of us, right? Not necessarily that people have followed the same job role, but the challenges and the need to find something outside of your career is not uncommon, right? So many of us have done that, have realized that we recognize the problem, but actually recognize that our career is part of the problem, right? Or our job, at least, the organization, the environment is part of the problem.
Absolutely. And I think for many parents and carers whose children are struggling, the impact on the income. And about 2 years ago, we undertook a survey in our group, and we found that 48% of parents had actually given up work or had lost income due to their children struggling. And the thing is about neurodivergence, yes, it is more highly correlated to low-income families, but it is not indiscriminate. You know, it affects everybody across all professions. And we know, for example, as well from work from Professor Tony Atwood, that he quoted that fathers particularly who are medical and dental, their children are 4 times at risk or 6 times at risk of having neurodivergence. So this affects all families and all income, but those who are having to work more than one job, who are having to leave their children at home, they are a much more disadvantage. And so, you know, we really do need to see a culture change in that needs-led approach.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of brings us quite nicely on to, you know, partly the reason for writing this book is because where is the parental support? Where is the support to ensure that parents don't have to leave their job, right? Or don't have to leave their career. And disproportionately, that has to impact women more than it does men. If we think about UK statistics. And that's not even just about leaving work. Also, carer responsibilities are taken up more greatly by women than men. Fact, it's reality. So it's impacting on women's careers if they stay in their career. It's impacting on their careers because often they're the ones who leave their career. And these are not choices in the sense of, oh, I would rather not be doing my job and I would rather be fighting these systems and processes and banging my head against the wall to try and support my child. These are not, they're often waking up one day and going, there is no longer a choice. There's a mental health crisis. There's a crisis in the family. There is we wake up one day and go, there's no longer a choice. It's just got to be done. And we'll find out how we're going to feed ourselves and pay bills and everything else tomorrow, because today our child needs to come out of the school or needs to, have the additional support. And that's wrong, right? That's not right.
That's absolutely wrong. And the thing is as well, before these people leave these careers or have to reduce their hours or seek another job that has flexibility that they can look after the children at home, for those children, for example, who might be in extreme mental health crisis, or those children who have got a school avoidance, the parents' well-being has been compromised already. So another survey that we undertook in our group said, well, a parent is only as happy as their least happy child. So if the child is not receiving the adequate support in school or can't attend school because of well-being and a poor needs-led approach, 76% of our parents had been to the GP for mental health challenges, because that state of helplessness that they can't rectify this problem for their child, and the stress then of the impact on income. So this isn't just an education problem. This is an economic problem, and the impact that we have on tax paying, etc. And it's a problem, in a whole system problem. So I think this is why in Wales we are undertaking a neurodevelopment improvement programme across our regional partnership boards that will align to the whole system approach NEST framework to go upstream. But it requires everybody to subscribe to that. And it means that where that begins is in education, that our children and young people work, the parents and carers have an equitable seat at the table to talk about what the needs are of the child and what can school do to prevent us all, the families, from travelling down that spectrum to loss of income and crisis, really.
So this is fascinating, and I want to hear more about that. But let's just take it back a step then and think, one of the biggest challenges for parents is to have their voices heard, right? And I don't care whether you're a CEO, a HR director, a sales manager, a taxi driver, a picker, a packer, whatever, right? You are struggling to get a voice. Some parents join the school of governors to get that voice. Some parents become the scout leader to ensure their child has somewhere to go. Like literally, I see parents all the time making these decisions to gain access and support for their child, to force the voice, right? But this is, we're talking about a small group of parents getting the voice. How do we support parents to elevate their voices, to better advocate for the needs of their children or their learners or what have you? But also, if we're thinking about this transitionary period we're going through, like, this is not going to go away. I know I'm doubling question here, which is not helpful to most people, right? But I'm just thinking about the journey as well. So it's not just about today. Parents are going to need, which they do, because the system's broken and they're fighting tooth and nail for help. But actually, if we go through this transitionary process, what you're talking about in Wales, which is being not replicated identically, but similar shifts are being changed in England, for example, and in other parts of the world where, we need to come back a few steps from the need at its extreme, i.e. a child can't even go to school, to a child is struggling to access learning within the classroom, right? And at the moment, it seems everything kind of gets squidged into one. As we change through that period, how can parents continue to advocate for their children and elevate their voices to ensure they're heard?
Do you know, there's so many layers to that, because first of all, parents need to understand what the needs are First of all, we need to understand what a needs-led approach is. What does that look like in practice? I mean, the default setting, because in education you've always had to have a threshold of severity in order to receive support, or maybe the child needs to be 2 years behind. We're still going through a culture change, a shift where the teachers and ALNCOs and head teachers are understanding that it's not about severity of symptoms anymore. It's about if the child is distressed, if the parent is reporting to the school that the child is not happy, or or they're concerned about their social integration and they're excluded or isolated at break and things like that, we have a duty now as a whole school approach to prevent poor outcomes for that child. And that means having a conversation with the parents and investigating what's going on, because it needs to be evidence-based. We can't just make assumptions because we work in education that we know the neuro profile of a child by observation. It doesn't work like that. What we have to do is address that power imbalance between the parents and the education and services as well, and sit around and have a conversation. And that requires a relationship. So it starts with positive, equitable relationships where you have a vision together to improve the outcomes for that child and preserve their well-being. And so that means breaking things down into social, emotional, and educational needs, and sometimes physical needs as well, and finding out where the concerns lay and what you can do to put in support. Now, the parents won't know that. They won't even know that. So what we can do for them is to signpost them to peer mentoring groups such as Parents' Voices in Wales, and there are other groups across Wales that provide that support, where we can empower them with the knowledge about neurodiversity, neurodivergence, what a needs-led approach is, so that they have a shared language and understanding of what the teachers and schools should be undertaking in the ALN reform and a whole school approach. So we can support them navigate that system. But what is really important is how parents advocate for their children with school. Because, in school's defence, nobody wants to work with a highly stressed and angry parent. And even though those heightened emotions are justified often, and they've been waiting a long time to be heard, the child's health might be deteriorating, their attendance might be deteriorating, the levels of stress we've talked about earlier and the impact on income and the well-being of the parent. But what we need to do is have some appropriate advocacy. And that is where the peer mentoring support can be really helpful. I've also undertaken a webinar on advocacy on the National Neurodivergence Team's website, which is under the Welsh Local Government Association's website, and parents can go there and see what the do's and don'ts of advocacy are. But it's about bringing people with you. If you are overwhelmed, and of course you go into a room where there's an ALNCO, there might be somebody from the local authority, and you're just a parent, you haven't got those skills to talk and the jargon that goes with it. Your focus should be, my child's not happy, my child is struggling, I need your help, please could you help us? And it's for the school to listen to what the characteristics or how that presentation is looking at home. We know that sometimes children camouflage and mask, especially these mainstream children who are probably missing middle kids, which is an unfortunate phrase, but the children that don't have a diagnostics, who are neurodivergent and are struggling. And those children may camouflage. So in fairness to schools, they may not see the difficulties that the parent sees. So the message really is the parent is the expert in their child. The school is the gateway and the expert in education and a needs-led approach provision. Together, you make a great team. It really is about relationships.
Incredible. And so, some of the challenges I think are the waiting for that to happen, what happens between now and then, and like the bridge that's going to support the parents who are already been waiting for a while. And I know that you have experience through those communities and your experience through kind of the whole family approach, right? Thinking about the family as a whole.
Yeah.
And I do wonder the amount of stories I hear of of marriages that have broken down through an inability to care for the child as a family, and therefore
Yeah.
having to separate the
Yes.
family to share the responsibility of care, because then you can share it once
Yeah.
each of a week. It just seems like this does not seem sane, right? This seems like completely off the
No.
wall. But this is how people are resolving situations where there is a lack of support for that kind of whole family piece. And I know that you talked about some of those things that should be happening to reduce some of the stress and anxiety. Anything else that you can tell us about your experience, what you've seen, or through that
Yeah.
community around what you think about that kind of whole family approach, and how maybe families can think about accessing support as a family?
Yeah. And I think that is so important that we keep the child in these situations where there's a family breakdown, where for the older, maybe older teenagers who have very challenging behaviours for the parents, and they may be, um, overlapping with county lines. We might have school exclusion. These really challenging, complex children who are in care. We know that there's a much higher correlation with neurodivergence, ADHD, oppositional defiance disorder, conduct disorder, with exclusion, county lines, and children who are looked after. Um, what this requires is keeping the child in the centre of our focus. What happens is we think about what we can provide as a school. Does that child fit in our box? If not, well, we'll have to exclude them. Services think about, well, that child can't be neurodivergent because there's a history of trauma. So no, we can't assess them for that. The parents don't know how to manage those behaviours because they are different behaviour management strategies different ones are required for those type of oppositional behaviours such as PDA. What we need to do is keep the child in the centre of our focus. And by doing that, we meet the rights of the child. And this is where the whole school approach and whole system approach is so important, where we we work in the community, we have a team around the family, team around the child. We have our family first early help hubs. Now, they're not being invited enough around the table at these team around the family meetings. Okay, they're just a gateway to support. That isn't whole system working. That's signposting. What we need to be having are specialists around the table to co-produce a plan, keeping the child in the centre of our focus, and providing support to the parents as well. So what does co-regulation look like at home? How can we provide parents with the skills to manage co-regulation, to think about some of the aspects of therapeutic parenting, which looks at low demand parenting, where we reduce the demands on the child to prevent the triggers which can lead to dysregulation. We also have to remember that, a high majority, around about 70% of the parents of neurodivergent children will be neurodivergent themselves. So they have to manage themselves before they have to put on their own mask before they manage their children. So it requires whole family intervention. And this is about trauma-informed language. It's about co-regulation. It's about psychologically informed environments. It's about strength-focused approaches and providing big praise and big awards when you have a behaviour that is favourable, because we need to almost retrain that child's brain, especially if they're the kids who have been seeking adrenaline seeking behaviours, because they haven't been able to access the more positive rewards from dopamine, and they've been reprimanded and ridiculed and excluded and isolated. Everybody needs a sense of belonging. And if we don't allow these kids to belong in school and in our services, they will find somewhere else to belong. And that is not always where we want them to be. So it requires whole family support. But that is a journey in terms of the whole system approach and the whole school approach in Wales. It's not about just providing support for the child. It's about building relationships with the family, because when you have a good relationship with the family, that leads to dialogue. When you have a dialogue, that kind of creates a constructive serve and return in conversation, where you can investigate and find out what the child's needs are and then co-produce a plan. Again, I reiterate, it starts with positive relationships.
And when we think about this, I guess third-party support, third sector support, however you want to define it, arm's length body support, community support. I remember I can't remember exactly now, 20 odd years ago, there was these centres set up for parents across the UK. And these centres were for parents coming in to get support in the early years when they were babies and toddlers, and you could go and there was groups and stuff. They kind of got decimated, right? They went. But do you foresee something like that? Because we see loads of centres to support autistic kids, for example, or do you think there is a gap there now where we almost need to go back to these kind of central hubs of support that are not necessarily specifically around support for children who are autistic? It's actually support, when we come back to the family approach, support to children and their families in early years. It feels like we've lost those hubs, those places to go. And even the ones that are available are run by people like you and I or something. Do you know what I mean? It's like somebody you've gone, I can't take this anymore. I'm going to set up, I'm going to go and lease a building here, and I'm just going to get people to come along. The amount of stories I hear of people who've just done that, and they're doing very well. But they're at risk because they're due to certain funding criteria.
It's not sustainable, is it, Theo?
Not sustainable, no. Not unless the money's put there to go, right, you're good for the next 3 years. And also, it's a postcode lottery, because it takes someone to go, I've had enough of this. I'm going to start to invite people to come along to this place once a week in a church or in a office building or whatever they can get their hands on, or in my living room. So do you think there's a big gap in that, like bringing people together, not just online in these communities, but these spaces where people can get respite support, where they don't have to beg and plead for the respite and support, which kind of feels like it is at the moment?
Yeah. I think there's some amazing third sector that backfill the gaps that statutory services can't provide, because the problem that you also have is that some of the statutory services have some great early help hubs and some family first, but there's a waiting list. And we know that the whole problem that we have is the waiting list scenario, where the minute people put on a waiting list, they're going to start travelling down that severity spectrum, where things are going to be a lot more complicated by the time they get there than when they were first referred. So third sector has a really important role, and that is the third sector is part of the NEST whole system framework in Wales. It is recognised as being really important. So, for example, in Cardiff and Vale, Platform, which is a third sector mental health charity, have created crisis hubs for young people that can just walk in and receive the support that they need. And that's amazing. But, why are kids having to access crisis hubs? Why are they having to get to that point? What we should be doing is working more preventatively. And absolutely agree with you. And Sally Holland, who was the previous Children's Commissioner for Wales, had written the No Wrong Door report, which is about children and families not having to hunt down services to find the help that they need when they needed it. And one of the things Sally envisions was always having a multidisciplinary community hub where people could go and have a holistic support plan, early help, enhanced support as and when required. That would be the gold standard, right? That would be the gold standard. But unfortunately, in reality, when we're thinking about the funding issues that we have in Wales, there is no money currently. Brexit hasn't helped. And then we've got the fallout of COVID lockdown for a lot of these neurodivergent kids. So it's a kind of, the demand would outstrip the capacity to even, I think, support them in early help hubs. I think even if we set them up today, Theo, the demand would be, huge. So I think third sector has a really important role, but it needs to be sustainable. And what we're finding is, I think, in Welsh Government are realising the importance of third sector, because not only do the skills do they bring, but also that importance of peer mentoring, like Parents' Voices in Wales, that support and help families navigate the system, signpost them to resources and self-help support. But again, a lot of this stuff is voluntary. Um, people have to work, like myself. I have to undertake training. I get involved in co-production across services in Wales in order, as a social enterprise company, to maintain peer mentoring groups across Wales. So we aren't specifically funded for that. And it's something really that, we need to have that discussion, so that in order that we can provide families with that early help. I can't see early help, multidisciplinary early help hubs happening anytime soon from statutory services. It will really be a third sector innovation.
Wow. I guess that's the reality of the current state of play, isn't it? And we can't deny the fact of where we are.
Yeah.
And I guess over time, hopefully, things will evolve and change in that area. What do you think then, if we start to think about the journey for the young people as they start to think about, because a lot of parents, I'm scared out of my life around September, which is when one of my children goes into high school, right? That is like a whole other
Yeah.
experience of fear, especially when I link some of my experiences directly to that transition for me, were pretty
Yeah.
significant. So there will be a lot of parents in that period of puberty right through to then what next after school. And that's scary for a lot of parents. So from my perspective is, I honestly do not. I came out of school with nothing. I don't care if my child comes out of school with nothing. I want them to come out alive. Like that is base level. And I know that may sound weird to a lot of people, but like that is like a burning level of anxiety around survival within that system. And then if they survive, what is then after that for them? Because we got incredible kids, but it comes down to this base level of fear, which it shouldn't be. And that's me that I've
It's
got myself
absolutely,
into a privileged place. A lot of other people aren't in a privilege, but haven't been able to dig
yeah.
themselves out of a hole. So just to tell us a little bit around your view around that.
I think that anxiety is contagious. That was something that Dr. Liz Gregory, clinical psychologist in Wales, had written during COVID, during lockdown, to help families. And she said that anxiety is as contagious as happiness. What we have to do as parents is model, first of all, let's not catastrophize. Okay, let's not catastrophize, because that creates an expectation that there is going to be problems, that there is going to be a fall. And I did it too, the worry. And remember, as parents who are neurodivergent ourselves, we've lived that catastrophe. Okay. I also left school with very little, and most of my achievements, all my achievements, have been post-statutory education. And I think that, we don't want that for our children. But what we can do is we have to remember that we've been empowered with that experience and that knowledge. And we need to think about what the needs are of our children in primary school. So break that down into social, emotional, and educational needs. What support do they need socially? Then that could be peer support in school. It could be a buddy system. It could be some support with some strategies like group work that they do in school to problem solve in social situations. Something they call Talk About was a program that they sometimes use, things like that. Then emotionally, do they have access to a trusted adult in school? And this kind of plan that they have in primary school should continue into high school. It's not primary schools, which are nurturing spaces anyway, that shouldn't be a cliff edge when they go to transition. So thinking about, do they have a trusted adult? What does that trusted adult, what can they contribute to that transition plan for that child before they go to high school, so that they can hand over that baton to a trusted adult in the high school? And educationally, what support did they need in the classroom? Because invariably it's not rocket science inclusive classrooms, actually. It's just having, not everybody needs a one-to-one TA. It's just having prompts, it's having encouragement, explanations, clarifications, one instruction at a time, templates of examples of written work. This isn't difficult stuff. But what we're aiming to do is to understand what the needs are of that child and make sure that they're prepared for that transition into high school. And the high school and the primary school work cohesively together to ensure that there's a seamless transition for that child and family. And that means repeated visits. It might mean photographs of classrooms. It might mean walking in putting on the uniform a few times before they go, doing the walking journey or the drive journey. So there's no big surprises on the day. But also, that's the needs-led approach. But then, what is the strengths of the child? How do we create aspirations through that journey? And what we say to a child who's got DLD, developmental language disorder, is don't worry about French, okay? Don't worry about it. That's never going to be your strength. I'm not looking for, the school may be looking for C and above in French. You know the reality is, and as long as they get validated by the parent who can say, I am just wanting you to be happy, I want you to find a subject you enjoy, and I want you to embrace it. Okay, so you find out what the strengths are, and there's I think it was William Dodson, or Dobson in America, that says, think of it as a Venn diagram. What are they good at? And then what do they enjoy? And the aspirations lie in the middle. And so you find out what your child is good at, you identify that, you name it, you tell them regularly every day what they're good at, and you find out what they enjoy, and you find aspirations for a career in that. And that strength should be their main identity, not the worry and the angst of going into high school, not catastrophizing that they won't come out with, so what if they don't come out with 10 GCSEs? So what? You want them to have an identity that, and say to them, school is something we've all got to go through. It isn't right for all of us. I just want you to be happy. I want you to feel that you know who you are. I want you to identify your strengths. I just want you to try your best. There is no expectation on grade. It's just a journey. It won't define you. Most people who are neurodivergent do tend to be there to find their identity and their successes later on in life, especially with ADHD, right? Kids that have DLD as well, and that conversation, those expectations, especially when we think about the delays in maturation for ADHD kids and our expectations of their ability to organise, their working memory, their emotional regulation. Those conversations we should be having with secondary school before they go there to reduce the expectations of the staff. And that what you can do is have a one-page profile that child can take to every classroom and say, I work best in this situation. I flourish in positive relationships. I need regular praise. I may need to move. I may need movement breaks. This is for, thinking about ADHD now. Or if it's DLD, I might need a topic word list at the beginning of term that I can look through and work with my parents at home before. So it's thinking about simple strategies, empowering the parents, and again, dialogue with the secondary school. Don't expect people to understand your child's needs. Don't rely on anybody to communicate on your behalf. Do it yourself, do it politely, and find somebody in the secondary school who you connect with, that you feel that you have a good relationship with, and that person can be your point of contact and advocate for your child in your absence. That, we do catastrophize, we do worry, but all we need to be is strategic.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. But these are I feel I feel like a little bit like you've gone, stop it, Theo. Snap out of it. And I like that, in the sense that like, don't get too. But now the funny thing is, though, what's the term? I'm beyond positive. I'm like the most positive person. So whenever I'm at home and I get into a negative space or place, my wife gets really worried, because it's very rare, because I'm normally like a heightened state of positivity. But then you still got your own triggers and your life experiences, your own trauma that
Yeah,
reminds you of
sure.
certain things, and therefore that you sometimes cannot escape in certain moments. However, everything you've just said there is brilliant, and things that we've been following as parents. And I think there's so much value in what you've just talked about there. So our child has had 2 meetings, been to the school twice before the general meeting where all the other kids do. So she'd already been twice before as like a day to
Yeah.
get used to the environment in the school. We have already bought the school uniform in the last week so that she can try it all on and get comfortable with it and have a decision in it so that it's not a barrier to September. Well, we've already, like you're ticking off so many things that otherwise you might push down the
Yeah,
road,
you do.
because
Yeah,
we
yeah,
just
yeah.
know
It's
that
preparation.
textures,
It's
yeah,
yeah,
we know that certain textures, materials, we're buying the same trainers she's had for school in a bigger size. Like we're trying to keep so much the same so that change and transition
mhm.
is not as difficult. But there's some stuff you can't. So of all the interaction and stuff we've had with the school, and their head of send is incredible. It's been really brilliant and engaging. That's a privilege, I can tell you. Not always the case. But um, but the but some things you can't change. Like, yes, I can say to my child, your worst lesson is French and you absolutely hate it and you know zero French in the time you've been doing it. But now you're going to go into a school where they expect you to do 2 languages. So I've gone to the school and said, I don't want her to do any
Yeah,
languages. I don't want her to do them. I like, uh, but the but the challenge you got then is the school say, well, you've got to do one of them by law. So we'll let you not do one of them, or by the law of the school or whatever.
yeah,
I mean, so you then this. I wish. I guess what I'm saying, Ceri, is I wish we could shift to a place where we had some level of choice, where we could just say, you know what, in the big scheme of life, as parents, our choice for our child is we don't feel she needs to do languages. Can we have another option of what our
I
child does?
absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's about creating an autonomy for the child in that school space in learning, because ultimately what you want to do is you want the child to be regulated, happy, and be able to engage to learn. If a child's dysregulated and anxious, they're not going to learn. So, I mean, what is the point of forcing that issue? So what I would say to parents is your focus is the well-being of your child and their ability to learn. That requires them to be regulated. So what you need to say to the school is, we know that my child will never excel at languages. It's almost forcing a child with a physical disability to run in a sports day race. We just wouldn't do it. It's inappropriate. They may say, okay, we can offer a room um, where they can go during that lesson and undertake different work. Absolutely fine. Why is that a problem? Okay. Or you could say, they may say they don't have the staff to supervise that pupil in a room where they can undertake a different. They might find that they have a room with several other children who can't undertake languages for whatever reason. Can is that is that a possibility? Again, it's watching our language and saying, is that a possibility? Could you please consider that? If they say they can't, in which case I would speak directly to that language teacher, and I would say, I am not going to be encouraging my child to engage in your lesson. I'm not trying to offend you. We're not trying to be difficult, but is it possible that my child could undertake what you find actually? I was going to say undertake different work during that lesson. Although they sit in the class, can they do something else when they're in the class? And
Well,
that's
our child
absolutely
will be doing
fine.
additional
So
maths, instead of one of those languages,
absolutely
because
fine, and
maths
that's
is a
yeah,
core area, an area of significant challenge, like languages. But rather than
yeah,
having both, which are very difficult, do a little bit more of one
yeah.
and forgo the other.
Yes, and it might be that they will be flexible that way, because you can say, look, these are the strengths of my child, these are the challenges. Is there any way that we can do more of the stuff she's good at, and less of the stuff that she's not? And I think the analogy of forcing a disabled child to run in a sports day, for me, says it all. Why would you put the child through the humiliation of speaking in a different language, a second language in class in front of peers, if they have something like developmental language disorder or if they have a learning disability. Why would you do that? Because what you're doing is compromising their well-being. And the whole point of the whole school approach in England and Wales is to maintain a positive well-being. So what you would say is, we would say things like, in English, for example, could you not ask my child to read aloud in the front of the class? And same for a child with dyslexia. If you need them to read to you for direct observation purposes, could they do it one-to-one after class or at another time? What we have to do is preserve the well-being and the esteem of these kids, and not expose them and force them to do things that they are cognitively unable to do. So it is about it is about finding their strengths and asking. You can't always get everything you want in terms of reasonable adjustments for a child in school. You can't, but what you can do is you can negotiate and you can provide evidence for it. And again, it's about you being regulated, advocating positively for your child, building a relationship with that ALNCO or building a relationship with the SENCO, and just co-producing a plan. And what you're saying is, my child is at risk because of their neurodivergence or learning difficulties. They think and learn differently. What we're concerned about is she's at risk of refusing to go to school. We don't want to go down that path. Or she might be at risk of mental health challenges. We don't want to go down that path. Can we work preventatively and make sure that she stays in school and can be her best self?
Absolutely. And that's brilliant. And just as we bring today's session to a close, I'm also fascinated about, we've covered a lot there, Kenny, actually, and I know there's a lot more that we could cover, but certainly thinking about nutrition. And, we've really struggled with cost of living, produce going up, inability to feed kids effectively. And I know for my child, they have an aversion to taste, texture, and smells, which means at the moment they're not eating in school at all, really. So we can service them food in the morning because we know what they'll eat, and we can service them a good, nutritious meal in the evening. But really, in the day, at the moment, barely any food getting eaten at all. Partly because heightened level of anxiety around overwhelm and everything else, but partly because taste, texture, smell, like the smell of the dinner hall or the smell of this or other people eating and how that. So if I just think like that then affects energy levels, it affects brain functioning, it affects physical development and all these other areas. How big an impact do you think that is having on families and parents and children's ability to be successful in that environment at the moment? And do you think there's anything we could do about
I
that?
think I remember being when I was in school. I remember I had poor interoception, so I was never hungry or thirsty. And I suppose, I was late developing as a result because of obviously the nutrition was in. I couldn't eat all day, so we were sent off with a big breakfast. Mum and Dad were really, insistent that we had cereal, egg, and toast before we left for school, and I couldn't eat all day because I look back, it must have been anxiety. It is a worry. The hydration is more of a worry because at least if they're having food in the evening and the morning, what you could suggest is, if you are concerned about the level of intake, is to go and see your community dietitians or your GP for referral to the dietitians in order that you can have a review of their intake and get some advice, qualified advice that way, to make sure that they're having adequate B vitamins and iron and folate and proteins and etc., which can impact learning. Iron is really important in terms of learning. For going into school, it might be that you request that they have a safe space that they can go and eat a packed lunch that you've created from home, somewhere that they can go and regulate. It might be a sensory room even, and somewhere that they can take even a few snacks. But the hydration is really important, and something that sometimes neurodivergent kids need reminding to have drinks through the day. That can cause massive fatigue. So, think about alternative spaces for lunchtime? Can they go somewhere to regulate, somewhere that they can eat a packed lunch from home? School dinners sometimes for kids, the dinner hall helps, for some kids, that kind of peer pressure to eat new foods, that can be helpful. You can try it, but it has to be child-led. So you have to, whatever you do, don't make it prescriptive. Work with a plan, co-produce a plan with your child or young person, and make sure that they subscribe to that, because otherwise you're just going to create more angst for the family, more worry. And as I say, go and speak to the GP, go and have a meeting with your dietitian, because sometimes restricted food intake can often correlate with ARFID, they call it, can often correlate with neurodivergence. And those are the people who should be advising you.
Oh wow! I just wish there was easier access to all of that as well. Like it was signposted more regularly, because from a school perspective, I think you can
Yeah.
tell them that, and it would be nice if the school at that point were guiding you. There was some kind of, when we're thinking about the whole community approach, that you as a parent, like what you're just telling me there is, it shouldn't be new knowledge to parents. Do you see what I mean? But it will be. And that
No,
is, I
it
think,
will be,
fundamentally
yeah.
a problem that we have.
And I think maybe, volunteering with all the knowledge and skills that you have and working to a strength-focused approach with yourself, Theo, it might be offering to put in some of those frameworks. Excuse me, got a frog in my throat. It might be offering to put in some support frameworks for schools to meet the needs of learners. So it might be, for example, barriers to eating. What can you do? What can you add and contribute to their current policies that then will be accessible to parents on the school website? When we're offering our support as governors, and I've been a school governor as well, like you said earlier at the beginning, parents, I also became a school dinner supervisor. When I had first concerns with my son, we go undercover. We do some really big
Absolutely.
stuff just to check on our children. We do. But what we can do is just work collaboratively with the school and offer our knowledge and skills and sharing the evidence base. That's so important. I've shared in secondary school for my daughter and the importance of co-regulated relationships, because she was ADHD and oppositional and easily dysregulated. I said, look, there's certain people who trigger her that she doesn't have positive relationships with. Is it possible that we can not work with them anymore, and she can choose Mr. X as her trusted adult? Because we knew it worked. It's having those honest conversations and sharing an evidence base, and also praising school when they get it right and saying, this is working really well. Thank you so much. Because they need to know that if it works well for your child, they may replicate that for another.
I think that is an incredible place to round it up today, and I absolutely agree. You have to work collaboratively. You have to understand the significant pressure that professionals are under in the health system, in the education system, and I always say, it's Covey that said it first, but like, seek first to understand, then to be understood. If you can't understand the position your teacher's in, how are you going to then be able
Yeah,
to communicate your needs or your child's needs? Because the two just won't connect. And that's the same within the healthcare sector, the same if you try and go and advocate yourself in front of a GP. I say in the workplace, if you want help from another department, understand their job description, their role profile, understand what that person is tasked to do every year. And if you can make your needs attached to what they have to do, they will help you. If you're asking them to come outside of their job responsibility, then that's difficult for them, especially if they're already working at 120%. So I think if you come to everything you do when you're trying to get support of thinking, how does this plug into what this person is responsible for doing? And if they can't help me,
absolutely.
who else can? And that, because it's not that
Yes.
nobody else exists, but it may not be them. And you may be banging
Yeah,
your head against this person when in actual fact their ability to help
absolutely.
you is minute. And
It's
somebody around the corner could
it,
help you.
it, it it is. It's the
I,
right person doing the right thing at the right time.
And I think as parents, we often don't know that. And you've given a great example there. And when we do know that, actually, what a great idea. Why not offer that to the board of governors, offer that to the teacher and say, I could actually write up a quick one pager on this. Would that be valuable for you if I wrote up the one pager about experience that
Yeah.
you could share with parents in the
Offer
future or with other
training,
teachers? I love that concept and idea. And that's us in our own little way, giving a little something back, if we have the capacity, the capability to be able to do it, of course. Lovely. Ceri, you've been
Thank you.
amazing. I knew you would be.
Thank
Absolute
you.
pleasure. Any other information, links, you can share them with me and I'll put them in the description of this podcast. Can they find you on LinkedIn? Anywhere else they should seek you out, Ceri?
Yes, we're on Facebook, the closed group for parents and carers in Wales. We're under Parents' Voices in Wales. We're on Instagram under Parents' Voices in Wales, and you can find us on X, that was Twitter, at PCAMS. And yeah, please follow us. Please help us create that ripple effect of inclusion across Wales. Thank you.
Many hands make light work. So let's all get involved and support where we can. Ceri, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.